Still stuck in that little office, huh? My ex's wife laughed, flicking her diamond bracelet as he smirked beside her. Some people just never rise, she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I only smiled and stayed silent. The next morning, their own $25 million deal sat on my desk, waiting for my signature. The look on their faces when they saw me in that same used chair, unforgettable. Every conversation inside the Metropolitan Grill froze the moment Elisa's voice carried across the room. Still stuck in that little office, huh? Some people just never rise. She stood next to Julian at the bar, twisting her diamond bracelet for effect, motioning toward me with her wine glass. The couple seated beside my table actually put down their forks to watch. A waiter stopped mid-step, balancing a trembling tray of drinks. Julian joined in, raising his voice so the entire dining room could hear. Still pushing papers while the rest of us build empires. Right, sweetheart? The word sweetheart cut deeper than anything else, the same name he used during our marriage. I stood there, reservation card in hand, feeling dozens of eyes judging my off-the-rack blazer against Elisa's designer dress. What they couldn't see, what would have changed everything, was the email sitting on my phone from Leonardo. It confirmed that Julian and Elisa's $125 million pharmaceutical acquisition had landed on my desk at Apex Consulting, awaiting approval from Victoria Blackwood. They didn't know Victoria was me. Before we continue, thank you for being here. If you believe every underestimated woman deserves her moment to rise, make sure to subscribe. It's free and helps us share more stories like this. Now, let's dive in. The hostess touched my elbow gently, her voice quiet. Your table is ready, Ms. Whitmore. I followed her through the path of stairs, each step feeling like a mile. Someone at the bar lifted a phone, and I heard the click of a camera. By the time I reached my booth in the corner, my hands had steadied, but my jaw still ached from clenching it. The waiter arrived quickly and professionally, pretending not to have witnessed the scene. I ordered the salmon and a glass of Malbec, then opened Leonardo's email in full. The acquisition paperwork had been submitted 3 months earlier, back when Julian and Elisa's company, Whitmore Hartley Holdings, believed themselves untouchable. New SEC regulations requiring third-party approval for pharmaceutical deals exceeding $100 million had caught them at the perfect time. Their lawyers had chosen Apex Consulting for its leader, Victoria Blackwood, known for fast, discreet approvals. The irony almost made me laugh. For 8 years, I'd hidden behind Victoria's name, building an empire while everyone assumed I was trapped in middle management. The entire deception began the day Julian told me my business ideas were cute but unrealistic. Now, his entire future depended on a signature from the same woman he believed was still bringing coffee to real executives. My phone buzzed, Hannah texting about tomorrow's lunch. My younger sister never stopped worrying about what she called my dead-end career. Just this morning, she'd called to lecture me about not resting, about the dark circles under my eyes. I'd wanted to tell her about the 3 companies I'd saved before sunrise, about the hostile takeover I'd stopped with a plan I drafted at 4 in the morning. Instead, I'd promised to leave work early, knowing that promise would be broken before the day was done. The salmon arrived, perfectly seared and plated with almost mocking precision. I cut into it mechanically, barely tasting it, my mind spinning over Leonardo's findings. The Whitmore Hartley deal was dangerously overleveraged, based on projections that anyone with real experience would see as fiction. Without a full restructuring, they'd face bankruptcy within 18 months. Another message appeared from Leonardo, pulled their financials. Personal guarantees from both C. Whitmore and E. Whitmore Hartley. They had put everything on the line. Julian had used his grandmother's trust fund. Elisa had mortgaged her father's real estate holdings. If this deal failed, and without my approval they'd lose everything. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Conversation filled the air again, though I caught the occasional sideways glance. The couple who'd stopped eating to watch were now deep in conversation, likely dramatizing what they'd just witnessed. The waiter who had frozen earlier now moved smoothly through the aisles, giving my booth a careful distance. That morning had started like every other over the last 8 years. The alarm at 4:45, the quiet drive through Manhattan, the elevator ride to the 42nd floor where my real office waited. My corner suite, the one no one knew was mine. Leonardo always arrived first, leaving detailed reports on my desk. Companies in crisis, hostile takeovers unfolding, executives desperate for unseen help. This morning's stack included Hartley Pharmaceuticals, losing $3 million a day while fending off a predatory fund. I'd spent 2 hours crafting a poison pill defense that would protect 4,000 jobs. They would thank Victoria Blackwood in boardrooms, never realizing she was the woman they'd walked past in the lobby, assuming she was another anonymous employee. Earlier today, Nathan Drake had called during my coffee break, his voice thick with emotion as he shared that his daughter Lily had just been accepted to Stanford. "She's writing her essay about you, Miss Blackwood," he'd said, about the invisible guardian angel who saved her father's company. I'd listened through the voice modulator, wishing I could accept his invitation to meet, to let him shake the hand that had saved Meridian Tech from collapse. But Victoria had to remain invisible. If anyone ever discovered that Victoria Blackwood was actually Rosalie Whitmore, divorced, dismissed, and supposedly trapped in a small office, everything would fall apart. Respect would vanish. Credibility would disappear. So I kept the truth buried, even if it meant celebrating every victory alone with takeout and wine. The Malbook was excellent, better than what I usually allowed myself. I'd chosen the Metropolitan Grill tonight as a small reward after a punishing week. 16-hour days had become standard, but this one had pushed even my limits: 3 hostile defenses, 2 restructurings, and 1 brutal proxy fight that kept me awake for 37 straight hours. Julian and Elisa had probably come here to celebrate their upcoming acquisition, certain that Victoria Blackwood's approval was a formality. They had no idea they'd just humiliated the very person who controlled their future. The same woman they'd mocked for never rising was about to show them exactly how high she'd climbed. I paid the check and gathered my things, aware of how conversations faltered as I walked past the tables. By morning, the story would ripple through their social circles, poor Rosalie Whitmore, still trapped in her small office, while Julian and Gabriella built their empire. Let them whisper. Let them laugh. Tomorrow afternoon, they'd walk into Apex Consulting expecting to meet Victoria Blackwood. Instead, they would find me at the head of the table, my nameplate gleaming beside a stack of papers, their $125 million deal marked with enough red ink to paint their future crimson. The woman they'd just publicly mocked would be the one deciding whether their empire stood or crumbled. At the valet stand, I accepted my coat and paused by the restaurant's mirror, trying to compose myself. My reflection revealed exactly what everyone else had seen: a woman in a department store blazer, carrying a worn laptop bag that had clearly seen better years. Someone who didn't belong in Manhattan's power dining scene. I reapplied my lipstick, a drugstore shade, not the designer brand Gabriella likely kept in her purse, and walked back through the heavy double doors. The maitre d' glanced up with a look of sympathy mixed with embarrassment. "Would you prefer a different table, Ms. Whitmore? Perhaps something more private?" The question was well-meaning, but moving would look like retreat. I shook my head and retraced my steps through the main dining room, where conversations had resumed, yet eyes still followed me. Julian and Gabriella had moved from the bar to a prominent table near the windows. Their group had grown, joined by 2 couples from our old social circle. Trevor Langford from Goldman Sachs lifted his martini in a mocking salute when he spotted me. His wife, Emily, who once called me for advice during her divorce, suddenly became deeply interested in her menu. "Dila's here," Gabriella announced brightly, her tone carrying across the room. "We were just reminiscing about the old Yale days. Remember when you were going to revolutionize corporate consulting?" She laughed, a sound that chimed like shattering glass. God, we were all so naive back then. I stopped beside their table. Walking past would have looked cowardly. Up close, I could see the meticulous precision of Gabriella's appearance, the glossy highlights that probably cost more than my utility bills, the injectables keeping her forehead unnaturally smooth, the designer dress whispering money with every seam. Julian's watch was new, a Patek Philippe easily worth more than most annual salaries. "Hello, everyone," I said evenly. Enjoying your evening? Emily finally looked up, her smile polite but uneasy. Rosalie, it's been forever. How are you? Before I could answer, Julian jumped in. Rosalie's still at the same place, aren't you? What was it again? Administrative services. He turned toward Trevor with a smirk. She handles paperwork for one of those small consulting firms downtown. Very stable. Very predictable. The word predictable hung between us like a verdict. Trevor shifted in his seat, and his wife avoided my eyes. The other couple, whose names escaped me, exchanged uncomfortable glances. It pays the bills, I said simply. Gabriella laughed, the sound bright and cutting. Oh, Rosalie, always so practical. I suppose someone has to handle the grunt work. Not everyone can be a visionary. She brushed Julian's arm with exaggerated affection. We were just telling Trevor about our new acquisition. Pharmaceutical sector, 9 figures, she boasted. 8, Julian corrected quickly, but the damage was done. I'd seen the actual number in Leonardo's email, 125 million. The need to inflate it, to perform their success for an audience, told me everything about their insecurity. How wonderful for you both, I managed to say, though the words tasted like ash. Gabriella continued, twisting her bracelet so the diamonds scattered light across the table. I was just telling Emily earlier that we should all be grateful for our journeys. Some of us build empires, some of us support them. Both roles matter. Her tone dripped with condescension disguised as wisdom. Emily looked mortified. Trevor cleared his throat and muttered something about needing to check with their babysitter. Absolutely, I replied smoothly. Everyone plays their part. Julian leaned back in his chair, the same leather squeaking sound I remembered from our old dining set, the one I kept after the divorce because he hadn't wanted it. You know what I always admired about you, Rosalie, he said, smiling. Your acceptance of limitations. So many people waste their lives chasing impossible dreams, but you found your level and stayed there. There's a kind of wisdom in that. Found my level. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stood there, my phone heavy in my pocket with the truth they didn't know. Every instinct screamed to expose it, to wipe the smugness from their faces with 3 simple words, I'm Victoria Blackwood. But timing was everything in business, in revenge, in life. That's one way to look at it, I said. The waiter arrived with their appetizers, giving me the perfect exit. Enjoy your dinner, I said, already turning away. Oh, Rosalie, Gabriella called after me, her voice projecting again for the room to hear. If you ever need a reference for a better position, don't hesitate to ask. Julian has connections everywhere now. I turned back, smiling, the kind of smile that could almost pass as gratitude. That's very generous of you, Gabriella. I'll keep that in mind. Crossing the dining room felt like navigating a minefield of stares and whispers. The young couple from earlier had moved on to dessert, though their eyes tracked me with voyeuristic curiosity. The older businessman nearby pretended to focus on his phone but still glanced up as I passed. When I finally reached my booth, the salmon had gone cold, its perfect presentation now dull and congealed. The waiter appeared immediately, offering to have the kitchen prepare a new plate. I accepted, grateful for one genuine act of kindness in an evening full of deliberate cruelty. While waiting, I opened my phone and reviewed the acquisition documents Leonardo had sent. Every page revealed another layer of Julian and Gabriella's overconfidence, their properties, trust funds, and even future inherited assets tied up as collateral. Their personal guarantees were airtight, drafted by lawyers who assumed their clients understood the risks. A text from Leonardo popped up. Reviewed the subsidiary contracts. They're betting everything on an FDA fast-track approval that statistically won't happen. Want me to prepare the full risk assessment for tomorrow? Tomorrow, when Julian and Gabriella would walk into my conference room expecting to meet a legend named Victoria Blackwood, never realizing the woman they'd just mocked would be the one holding their signatures like a sword above their heads. Prepare everything. I typed back, full documentation. Every flaw, every risk, every reason this deal needs restructuring. The waiter returned with a new plate of salmon, perfectly seared and presented with an apologetic nod. This time, I made myself taste it, letting the warmth and flavor steady my breathing. From across the restaurant came another burst of laughter, something Trevor had said at Julian and Gabriella's table. The sound passed over me like rain on glass. I finished the salmon slowly, savoring it, then signed the check. My hands were steady now, though the tremor in my chest hadn't fully subsided. As I rose, the granite bar near the exit caught the light, the same swirled pattern as the kitchen island Julian and I had picked out years ago at a warehouse in Queens. We'd spent an hour arguing about the price until I convinced him it was an investment in our future. That same pattern now gleamed across the room, mocking me as he and Gabriella planned acquisitions with money that wasn't truly theirs. I collected my laptop bag and headed toward the door, taking the long route to avoid their table. But my eyes betrayed me, drawn to that marble surface where the bartender mixed cocktails. 7 years earlier, I'd spread my entire business plan across our matching granite island, color-coded folders and projection charts covering every inch. Julian had been eating a bowl of Lucky Charms, the marshmallow kind he refused to outgrow even at 32. A drop of milk had fallen onto my executive summary, and I'd wiped it away without stopping my pitch. Think about it, I'd told him, full of conviction. Companies lose billions every year to hostile takeovers, not because they're weak, but because they're unprotected. We could build a firm that specializes in defense strategies, make ourselves indispensable to every mid-sized company in America. He'd set his spoon down slowly, like someone disarming a weapon. His face wasn't angry or dismissive, it was worse. He'd looked at me with pity, the way you'd look at a child claiming she'd one day be an astronaut. Sweetheart, he'd said softly, that same word that always felt more condescending than tender. You're brilliant at executing other people's ideas. You notice every detail. You work harder than anyone I know. But creating something from nothing, that's a different skill entirely. I'd stood there, holding my laser pointer, which suddenly felt childish in my grip. You don't think I can do it? I asked. I think you should stick to what you're good at, he'd replied gently. There's no shame in being exceptional support. Not everyone needs to be the visionary. The memory burned as I stepped into the cold November air, pulling my coat tight. The valet offered to call a cab, but I refused. I needed to walk, to let the chill drive away the ghosts of that morning and everything that followed. 2 months after that conversation, Julian attended his father's charity gala alone. I'd stayed home, feverish with the flu, barely able to lift my head. Go without me, I'd told him. You shouldn't miss it. He'd kissed my forehead, promised to return early, and left smelling faintly of the cologne I'd given him for Christmas. He came back at 3 a.m, not drunk, not messy, just changed. Like someone had tuned him to a frequency I could no longer hear. He sat at the edge of the bed, still in his tuxedo, staring at his phone. Good party? I'd asked through my congestion. Yeah, he'd said. Yeah, it was enlightening. Within weeks, Gabriella Whitmore's name began appearing in his conversations like breadcrumbs scattered through the dark. Gabriella thinks the market's about to shift. Gabriella's father has connections in Shanghai. Gabriella understands ambition. She gets it, he'd said one night, absently pushing food around his plate. The scale of what it takes to make it in this city. Not everyone does. The message was clear, I didn't get it. My business plan was too small, too safe. My dream of a takeover defense firm was just that, a dream. Now, walking down Madison Avenue, I passed the building where our apartment had been, 5th floor, corner unit, overlooking a little park where dogs played every morning. 6 months after that gala, I'd found the divorce papers waiting on our granite island, neatly stacked beside a box of my belongings. He'd used his Yale law connections to make it clean, fast, and efficient. Half my savings disappeared in legal fees. The apartment was too expensive to keep, and he'd already arranged for the furniture to be delivered to his new place. That last night, I sat on the bare floor, drinking a bottle of corner store Merlot from a chipped coffee mug because the wine glasses were gone. My tears blurred the ink on the yellow legal pad where I sketched the structure for Apex Consulting, but they didn't blur my resolve. At 2 a.m, in a tiny apartment that smelled of the previous tenant's cats, Victoria Blackwood was born. Not out of joy, but out of survival. I filled out the incorporation documents, listing myself as operations manager. The world didn't need another Rosalie Whitmore. It needed someone untouchable. So I became her in voice, in tone, in presence. I spent the rest of that night practicing Victoria's accent, calm, confident, refined, a hint of old money, a trace of Ivy League education. By sunrise, my throat was raw, but Victoria was ready to speak to the world. The wind picked up as I turned onto my street, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust. My phone buzzed again, another message from Leonardo, but I didn't check it. I already knew what tomorrow would bring. Julian and Gabriella would walk into my conference room expecting to meet the legendary Victoria Blackwood. Instead, they'd find me, the woman Julian had once dismissed at our kitchen island, the one he'd left with divorce papers and an empty apartment, the same woman Gabriella had mocked in front of a crowd. They thought I'd been standing still all these years. But I'd been building something they could never comprehend. Every insult, every smirk, every act of condescension had become a brick in the foundation of something indestructible. Victoria Blackwood had been my chrysalis. And tomorrow I would finally emerge. My key turned in the apartment door just after midnight, but sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every humiliating detail from the restaurant until my alarm went off at 4:45. The city was still dark when I pulled out of my driveway, but my thoughts were already sprinting ahead to the meeting that would change everything. Leonardo was waiting in the lobby on the 42nd floor when the elevator doors opened, 2 coffees in hand and a look that told me he'd uncovered something big. He'd joined Apex 6 months earlier after I'd rescued his former employer from a particularly brutal hostile takeover. Smart, observant, and above all, discreet. "We need to talk," he said, following me into my office. I hung up my coat, took my seat, and noticed the tension in his shoulders. "What's on your mind?" He laid a folder on the desk, spreading out its contents like evidence in a trial, financial records, email timestamps, incorporation documents, timeline analyses. My stomach tightened the moment I recognized what he'd brought. "Hartley Industries," he said, tapping a sheet. The defense strategy was filed at 3:47 a.m. by Victoria Blackwood. Security footage shows only you in the building at that time. He pulled out another page. Brennan Steele. Victoria's digital signature came from IP address 192.168.1.42, your computer, not the separate workstation you said she uses. More pages followed. 6 months of quiet investigation stacked before me. The voice modulation software on my system. The identical legal phrasing in power of attorney documents. The fact that Victoria Blackwood had never been photographed, never appeared at a conference, never been seen by anyone. Leonardo looked up. "You're Victoria Blackwood." The silence stretched. I could deny it, keep the lie alive, or trust the man who'd discovered the truth and chosen to confront me privately instead of destroying me publicly. "When did you figure it out?" I asked quietly. "Suspected after 3 weeks," he said. "Confirmed after 3 months." The rest of the time, I tried to understand why. He leaned forward, curiosity softening his tone. "You've built something extraordinary here. Why hide behind a ghost?" I opened my drawer and placed 2 nameplates side by side, operations manager and CEO. Because ghosts don't have histories. They don't have ex-husbands who called their ideas cute or friends who quietly stopped inviting them to dinner. Victoria gets respect because she's a mystery. Rosalie would get dissected because she's real. Leonardo nodded slowly, processing that. "The hostile takeover we stopped last month, Nathanson Pharmaceuticals. The board thanked Victoria while you sat in the corner taking notes. They never looked at you twice." His mouth curved into a grin. "That's actually brilliant. You weaponized their underestimation of you." From that day forward, everything changed. Leonardo became my confidant, the only person who knew both sides of me. We'd work past 3 in the morning sometimes, the conference table buried in reports and empty takeout boxes from his mother's restaurant. "Boss," he'd say with that trademark grin, "Victoria's got a call from Tokyo in 10 minutes. Need the modulator." We developed a rhythm, me handling strategy, him managing the logistics that kept Victoria alive. When we saved Excelsior Biotech from a fund that had already bought 30% of their stock, he showed up with champagne. To Victoria, he toasted with a wink, and to Rosalie, may they both keep terrifying corporate raiders. It was the first time in years someone had celebrated both versions of me. 3 months into our partnership, he mentioned his mother's restaurant in Queens, how rising rent was strangling her after 12 years of perfect payments. He said it offhandedly over cold pizza at midnight, not asking for help, just venting. "Send me the lease," I said. "Rosalie, I wasn't." "Send it." That weekend, I restructured her lease through one of Victoria's shell companies. The landlord's management firm happened to owe Victoria a favor after I'd saved them from bankruptcy 2 years earlier. By Monday, the restaurant had a new 10-year contract with rate protections and penalties for arbitrary increases. Leonardo appeared in my doorway, speechless. "My mom's crying," he said. "She made you empanadas enough for an army. She wants to know who to thank. Tell her it was a friend who believes in protecting good businesses." He crossed the room and hugged me, brief, professional, but real. "This is why you hide," I said when he stepped back. "So we can help people without creating debts, without the weight of gratitude." "Or maybe," he said, meeting my eyes, "you hide because you're afraid of being seen as powerful." The words stung because they were true. 13 companies saved from hostile takeovers. 23 restructurings. Billions in market value preserved. All attributed to Victoria Blackwood, while Rosalie Whitmore went home to microwave dinners and solitude. Business magazines celebrated Victoria's brilliance. Forbes speculated about her identity. The Wall Street Journal called her the ghost in the machine of American business. And I, the ghost's creator, sat alone reading about myself. "You should go public," Leonardo said one night while we reviewed quarterly reports. "Take credit for what you've built." I turned my laptop to show him the comments section under an article about women CEOs, pages of venom accusing them of sleeping their way to success, ridiculing their appearances, speculating about their marriages. "A divorced woman with no connections, no Ivy League degree?" I said. "They'd destroy me." Victoria's mystery is her armor. The moment she becomes Rosalie Whitmore, that power vanishes. Leonardo didn't argue, but something in his expression changed, anger not at me, but at the world that made my secrecy necessary. We stayed late that night, analyzing market patterns and preparing defensive strategies for 3 new clients. The secrecy that had once felt heavy now seemed almost protective, until Leonardo suddenly froze mid-sentence, staring at his tablet. His eyes widened as he zoomed in on a document. "Rosalie," he said, his voice tight. "You need to see this." He turned the screen toward me. It was a confidential SEC filing from Whitmore Hartley Holdings. The figures leapt out immediately: $125 million for the acquisition of pharma industries. My gaze found the clause buried on page 3, third-party verification required by an approved consulting firm specializing in pharmaceutical analysis. "Keep reading," Leonardo urged, excitement flickering in his eyes. The next line sealed everything. "We recommend engaging Apex Consulting Group, specifically requesting oversight from Victoria Blackwood, given her unparalleled track record in pharmaceutical acquisitions." The tablet trembled slightly in Leonardo's hands. Whether from excitement or the weight of what we were seeing, I couldn't tell. "They filed this 3 months ago," he said quietly, scanning the screen again. "Before last night's performance at the restaurant. They still have no idea Victoria Blackwood is you." I sank back into my chair, the leather creaking beneath the sudden weight of realization. Julian and Gabriella had unknowingly placed their entire empire in my hands, the same hands they once dismissed as good for nothing more than pushing paper. The irony was too exquisite. Laughter burst from my chest, not bitter or sharp, but genuine, the first real laugh since Julian had walked out 7 years earlier. "They just handed us their future," Leonardo said, his grin spreading as he pulled up more documents. "This is poetic," I murmured. We spent the next 4 hours dissecting every page of the acquisition. Leonardo retrieved financial disclosures while I broke down the deal structure line by line. What we found wasn't just careless, it was catastrophic. "They leveraged everything," I said, highlighting section 47. Every projection assumes the best possible outcome. Look at this, Leonardo said, leaning over my shoulder. Personal guarantees from both parties. Julian pledged assets from the Whitmore Family Trust, I pointed out. That's his grandmother's money. She's 93. And here, I continued, tracing another clause, Gabriella's father co-signed using his real estate holdings. Half of Connecticut's commercial properties, if we believe their usual bragging. It was a house of cards built in a hurricane, borrowed against future inheritances, collateralized on assets they didn't fully own, all dependent on an FDA fast-track approval with a 12% success rate. Without restructuring, I said, this entire deal implodes within 18 months and takes their financial network down with it. Leonardo checked his calendar. Their lawyers requested a meeting with Victoria for tomorrow. 2 p.m., conference room A. Tomorrow? I exhaled slowly. That gives us less than 18 hours. I walked to the window, staring at the glittering city below. Each light represented someone's ambition, someone's illusion of control. Tomorrow, my illusion would end. We need to prepare the conference room, I said. It has to be perfect. For the next hour, we staged the room with surgical precision. I adjusted the lighting so that the illumination on their side would be slightly harsher, not enough to be obvious, just enough to unsettle. The chairs were arranged strategically, ours positioned for dominance, theirs set just a few inches lower, a subtle psychological edge. The smart glass, Leonardo said, gesturing to the wall control. We can make it opaque from their side. You can watch them arrive. Do it. He programmed the system, and I unwrapped my real nameplate from its protective cloth. Rosalie Whitmore, engraved in brass letters that had never before seen daylight in this building. Leonardo placed it at the head of the table like a coronation. What about Victoria? He asked quietly. She retires tomorrow. We ran the presentation 3 times to ensure perfection, 8 years of data, victories, testimonials, and billions in saved value, all attributed to a woman who technically didn't exist. By the time I got home, it was past 2 in the morning. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, tracing every possible outcome. The ceiling fan turned above me, and in its slow rhythm, the voices of the past returned like ghosts. Gabriella's taunting from the restaurant, still stuck in that little office, huh? Julian's patronizing smirk, stick to what you're good at, sweetheart. His father's cruel certainty, some people are meant to lead, others to follow. My college advisor's dismissive tone, you should aim for more practical goals, Miss Whitmore. Each memory cut sharp as glass, but instead of pain, they fed the fire. Tomorrow wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about dismantling their entire illusion. The woman they'd mocked would sit at the head of the table. The secretary they'd belittled would decide whether their empire stood or fell. I rose and walked to my closet. Tomorrow demanded more than my usual armor of neutrality. It required presence. The Saint Laurent suit hung untouched in its plastic sleeve, a gift to myself after my first major success, but never worn. Navy so dark it bordered on black, cut with lines that whispered authority rather than shouted it. I laid it across the chair, running my hand along the fabric. 3 hours until dawn. 15 hours until they entered my conference room. Anticipation pulsed through me like electricity. Victoria Blackwood had done her job. She'd protected me, given me cover to build an empire in the shadows. But tomorrow, Rosalie Whitmore would finally step into the light. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Leonardo. Everything's ready. This is going to be legendary. I didn't reply. There were no words for what was coming, only the certainty that every humiliation, every dismissal, every night spent being underestimated had led to this moment. The morning broke gray and heavy with rain. I dressed deliberately, each motion purposeful. The Saint Laurent suit fit like it had been waiting for this day. Its dark sheen caught the light in quiet defiance. I arrived at the office by noon, giving myself 2 hours to prepare mentally. At 1:45, I took my position in the observation room beside conference room A, watching through the one-way glass. Leonardo stood near the door, posture impeccable, composure controlled. The table gleamed beneath the adjusted lighting. My brass nameplate caught the overhead glow, gleaming like a crown waiting to be claimed. They arrived 5 minutes early, punctual, polished, eager to impress. Julian walked in first, and for a moment, my breath caught. He was wearing the Hermes tie I'd bought him for our 5th anniversary, the one I'd saved 3 months to afford. He had no idea. To him, it was just another accessory. Gabriella followed, her Louboutins clicking sharply against the marble floor. She wore cream-colored Chanel, hair pulled into an immaculate twist that probably cost more than most car payments. The same diamond bracelet from last night glittered under the lights, her chosen weapon of vanity. Their legal team entered next, 2 senior partners from Cromwell and Associates, a CFO whose nerves betrayed him, and an assistant who began arranging documents with robotic precision. They moved as one, exuding expensive confidence. "Miss Blackwood will be with you shortly," Leonardo said, his tone smooth, polished, and perfectly detached. Behind the glass, I straightened my jacket and took one long, steady breath. The curtain was about to rise. "Can I offer anyone coffee? Water?" "Just get her in here," Julian said, not rudely, but with the casual dismissiveness of someone used to being obeyed. "We have a 4 o'clock in Midtown." Through the glass, I watched him check his Rolex, another gift from me, this one from his birthday 6 years ago. The irony of him using my gifts while preparing to meet the woman he'd once dismissed made my fingers tighten around my portfolio. Gabriella settled into her chair with practiced elegance, adjusting her bracelet in what I recognized as a nervous habit. "I've heard Victoria Blackwood is particular about her entrances," she said to the lawyer beside her. "Some kind of power play, apparently. Worth it if she signs off quickly," the CEO muttered, shuffling through his papers. "We need this done yesterday." Leonardo caught my eye through the glass, a subtle nod indicating it was time. I drew a deep breath, feeling 8 years of preparation crystallize into this single moment. The door handle was cool beneath my palm. At precisely 2:03 p.m., I pushed the door open. The sound wasn't loud, but in the heavy silence of the conference room, it might as well have been thunder. I walked in with measured steps, my heels striking a steady rhythm against the floor. Every eye followed me, confusion already beginning to cloud their expressions. I crossed to the head of the table, taking my time, letting them absorb the cut of my suit, the confidence in my posture, the deliberate way I set down my portfolio. Only then did I sit, meeting each of them in turn. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I'm Rosalie Whitmore, CEO of Apex Consulting Group." The words landed one after another, each one a small explosion in the carefully constructed reality they had brought with them. Julian's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, the liquid trembling from the abrupt stop. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Gabriella's reaction was more visceral. Her perfectly lined eyes widened, the heavy mascara making them look almost exaggerated in shock. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, fingers finding the pearl necklace there, as if it could steady her. "This is," Julian began, stopped, tried again. "This is," but the sentence wouldn't complete. His mind was trying to reconcile the woman from last night, the one he'd called sweetheart with such condescension, with the CEO sitting before him. Their CFO began frantically flipping through his notes, pages rustling like dry leaves, as though somewhere in those documents he might find a different reality. One of the lawyers cleared his throat, started to speak, then thought better of it. "I believe you're expecting to meet with Victoria Blackwood," I said, allowing myself the faintest smile. "Victoria has been my professional alias for the past 8 years, a necessary fiction that allowed me to build this company without the burden of certain preconceptions." I nodded to Leonardo, who touched his tablet. The wall display behind me brightened, filling the room with Apex Consulting's record. Numbers scrolled past like a verdict being read, 15 years of documented victories, too. $3 billion in protected market value, a client list including several Fortune 500 companies, testimonials from CEOs who had never realized they were thanking Rosalie Whitmore. Gabriella gasped, a small, sharp sound she immediately tried to suppress. Her face had turned pale beneath her foundation. "You're lying," Julian finally managed, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of what?" I interrupted smoothly, pulling their contract from my portfolio. A joke? A mistake? I assure you, the only mistake here lies in your acquisition structure. I opened the document, pages marked with red ink like a professor's notes on a failing paper. My fingers found the first flagged section without even looking. Your valuation of pharma is inflated by 30%, I said, sliding the page across the table. You're basing it on projections assuming FDA fast-track approval, which historically has only a 12% success rate for similar compounds. Julian reached for the page with unsteady hands. Next, I continued, turning another section. Your debt structure collapses within 18 months under any conditions short of perfect execution, which, given current pharmaceutical sector volatility, is statistically impossible. The CFO had stopped pretending to search his papers. He was staring at my annotations, his face draining of color line by line. And these, I said, tapping the signature pages with my pen, these personal guarantees you've both signed, they'll bankrupt you when this deal fails. Julian, you've pledged your grandmother's trust fund. Gabriella, your father's real estate holdings are on the line. The market dynamics, Julian began, grasping for the safety of corporate jargon. I was ready. Leonardo handed me a tablet, and I pulled up 5 years of comparable acquisitions, failure rates highlighted in red. Would you like to discuss the Brennan acquisition? I asked evenly. Same structure, failed in 14 months. Or the Steinberg deal, currently under federal investigation. Gabriella still hadn't spoken. She sat motionless, her world visibly rewriting itself behind her eyes. The diamond bracelet she'd flaunted the night before now seemed to drag at her wrist like a shackle. The senior lawyer from Cromwell and Associates cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps we should review the terms more carefully, he said, though the weight of evidence had already crushed the authority in his voice. I pulled out another folder, case studies of every failed pharmaceutical acquisition that had followed their model. The Harriman deal, I said, sliding one forward, collapsed after 11 months. The Vega acquisition, federal investigation within 6. Morrison Pharmaceuticals, bankruptcy after 14. I laid each file down like playing cards in a losing hand. You're not following a playbook for success, I said quietly. You're following a manual for destruction. Julian's hands shook as he reached for the Harriman file, his face gray, aged 5 years in 5 minutes. These weren't. We had different projections, he stammered. Based on what data? I countered, opening their own models on my tablet. Your growth assumptions depend on market conditions that haven't existed since 2019. Your regulatory timeline ignores 3 pending FDA policy revisions. And your competitor analysis doesn't even mention the Korean pharmaceutical giant entering this market segment next quarter. The CFO's breathing had turned shallow and uneven soft, panicked gasps between every revelation that struck like a blow. One of the attorneys was hunched over his phone, typing with frantic precision, no doubt alerting the senior partners to the financial disaster unfolding before their eyes. Gabriella finally found her voice, though it emerged hoarse and trembling. How long? How long? She stammered. I tilted my head slightly, pretending confusion though I knew perfectly well what she was asking. How long have I been Victoria Blackwood? Leaning back in my chair, I let her words hang in the air for a moment, savoring them. 8 years. 8 long years of being dismissed, underestimated, and mocked. 8 years of quietly building an empire, while people like her believed I was just another assistant fetching coffee and organizing files. Her expression cracked, layers of polished makeup giving way to raw panic. The same woman who had publicly humiliated me the night before now sat before me, realizing she had mocked the very person who controlled her future. The trust fund, Julian whispered, his voice splintering. My grandmother's trust fund. She's 93. It's all she has for her care facility. Then you should have thought about that, I replied calmly, sliding a thick folder across the table. Before you leveraged her future on your fantasies. Inside was my revised contract, 40 pages of corrections and clauses. Leonardo distributed the copies to each of them as I spoke. I've restructured your deal. It's survivable barely. But only if you follow my terms exactly. The document turned their reckless gamble into a disciplined recovery plan. They'd still earn something, just not the fortune they had imagined. More importantly, they would avoid total collapse. "Sign it," I said quietly. "Or walk away and watch everything fall apart within 18 months. The room fell into absolute silence except for the sound of pages flipping. When Julian finally signed, his signature was so shaky it looked like a stranger's. Gabriella followed, her hand trembling so violently the pen nearly slipped from her grasp. "We're done here." I stood, and the words sealed the meeting. They filed out one by one, hollow, pale, their former arrogance replaced by the vacant stares of people who had just survived a disaster of their own making. 3 days later, Leonardo showed me his phone over morning coffee. Someone had recorded Gabriella's mockery that night at the Metropolitan Grill. The clip was everywhere: Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok. It played under a dramatic soundtrack. "Still stuck in that little office, huh? Some people just never rise." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Comment sections exploded. "Do you even know who she was talking to?" one viewer wrote. "That's Rosalie Whitmore, the CEO of Apex Consulting. She's worth more than everyone in that restaurant combined." The phrase "some people never rise" became a viral tagline, repurposed into posts celebrating underestimated women who had defied odds. Business Insider ran a feature titled "The Secretary Who Was a Shadow CEO." Forbes picked it up next, followed by the Wall Street Journal. Within 48 hours, Julian's board of directors held an emergency session. Leonardo's contact inside fed us the details: outrage over the over-leveraged deal, the reputational damage, the humiliation gone viral. The vote of no confidence was unanimous. 5 days later, Gabriella's father gave a measured interview to the Wall Street Journal. "My daughter's recklessness nearly cost our family everything," he said, his tone surgically detached. "She's been removed from all family business operations effective immediately." By the following week, both their online personas had vanished. Gabriella's meticulously curated Instagram disappeared, along with Julian's once-daily leadership posts on LinkedIn. 3 months later, Leonardo's network confirmed the inevitable: the divorce filing. They fought bitterly over assets that no longer existed, blaming each other for their shared downfall. Their attorney sent me polite letters requesting professional courtesy, not to speak publicly about the situation. I filed the letters in a folder labeled past and never replied. But I had no interest in their ruin. I wanted to transform the energy that built my revenge into something with purpose. That same week, the Apex Initiative was born, a fund to support women who had been dismissed, underestimated, or told they weren't capable of greatness. The first applicant arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Sophia Lin, 34, founder of a struggling biotech startup, eyes heavy from exhaustion. She had been rejected by 16 investors, most of whom told her she should find a male co-founder to add credibility. "They said my idea was too ambitious for someone like me," she explained softly, fighting back tears. I wrote her a check for $200,000 right there. "Ambition," I told her, "is exactly what we're funding here." Within 6 months, Sophia's company held 3 patents pending and signed a partnership with Johns Hopkins. She sent me a picture of her new office, her name on the door in gold letters, no longer hidden in a backroom. Every month, new women came through my doors. Engineers told they belonged in support roles. Doctors with groundbreaking treatments dismissed as risky. Consultants whose work was stolen by men who took the credit. I funded them all, but more than that, I gave them what I never had: belief without conditions. They didn't need to hide behind aliases or diminish themselves to be taken seriously. Julian accepted a demotion at his old firm, starting over at 41. The same colleagues he'd once outranked now assigned him tasks. Gabriella withdrew to her family's estate in Connecticut, vanishing from New York's social circuit entirely. Months blurred into one another: expansion, purpose, and growth. Each morning, I reviewed applications for the Apex Initiative, reading stories of women whose brilliance had been overlooked by small minds. Every one of them reminded me of those nights spent working above a Thai restaurant, building an empire from scraps while the world assumed I was invisible. 6 months after that fateful confrontation, Leonardo came into my office with a proposal. "We should celebrate," he said, sliding a folder across my desk. 10 years since you incorporated Apex, even if only you knew about the first two. Celebration had never been my instinct. I was always focused on the next goal, the next challenge. But he was right. The women we'd helped deserved a moment of triumph, a gathering that reflected what we'd built. We booked the ballroom at the Meridian Hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The guest list grew rapidly. Every company we'd rescued, every entrepreneur we'd funded, every partner who'd believed in Victoria Blackwood long before knowing who she truly was. 300 people in total, all part of the journey, knowingly or not. On the evening of the gala, I stood before the mirror, adjusting the emerald green neckline of my dress, a deliberate contrast to the muted grays I'd once hidden behind. My name tag read, Rosalie Whitmore, founder and CEO. No qualifiers. No apologies. No ghosts left to hide behind. The ballroom shimmered with light and conversation. Crystal chandeliers reflected against champagne glasses, laughter rose between tables, and everywhere I looked, I saw faces I remembered, faces of people who had once been stories of survival, now transformed into stories of victory. Nathan Drake was there with his daughter, Lily, now a sophomore at Stanford. Sophia Lynn had brought her entire team. Their startup logo gleamed proudly on every name tag. Leonardo stood near the podium, greeting guests with the calm ease of a man who knew the true weight of what they had built. When his eyes met mine, he lifted his glass slightly, a silent gesture of acknowledgement for how far we'd come since that night when he'd confronted me with spreadsheets, suspicion, and questions I couldn't yet answer. When the room finally settled, Leonardo stepped forward and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the polished marble and low hum of conversation, "I want to tell you about the most elaborate magic trick in corporate history. For 8 years, a woman built an empire while convincing the world she didn't exist. Tonight, we celebrate not only the success of Apex Consulting, but the revelation of the brilliant mind behind it all." He lifted his glass higher. "To Rosalie Whitmore, the woman who proved that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply needs to deliver." Applause erupted, washing over me in waves, warm, unfamiliar, almost cleansing after years of deliberate silence. Olivia Lynn, whose biotech startup we'd once rescued from a hostile takeover, took the stage next. She spoke about second chances, about doors that only opened because someone dared to believe in what others called impossible. Then Sophia approached the microphone, nervous but resolute. "Whitmore taught me something crucial," she said, gripping the podium. "The best revenge against those who dismiss you isn't to destroy them. It's to build something so undeniable that their dismissal becomes meaningless." Every woman funded by the Apex Initiative is living proof that being underestimated is just another kind of competitive advantage. Her words hung in the air, sharp, luminous, undeniable. As the crowd erupted in applause, I noticed movement by the entrance. Hannah. She stood there in her teaching clothes, the faint chalk dust still visible on her sleeve. Her face was caught between confusion and recognition. She had seen the news stories, the endless interviews, the viral video. Now she was seeing the truth in person. I excused myself quietly and made my way toward her. Her eyes filled with emotions that shifted faster than I could read them: disbelief, hurt, pride, awe. "Rosalie," she whispered, her voice tight. "This whole time, you let me think you were struggling." I said softly. "Just not in the way you thought." Her tears came fast, not fragile, but fierce. "Why didn't you trust me? I'm your sister. I worried every day, thinking you were working yourself to death for nothing." We drifted toward the tall windows overlooking the city, away from the laughter and music below. Manhattan glowed beneath us like a constellation come to life, every lighted dream, a risk, a heartbeat. "I had to do it alone first," I explained quietly, watching our reflections merge with the skyline. "If I had told anyone, even you, it would have changed everything: the doubt, the advice, the second guessing. I needed to prove it to myself before I could prove it to anyone else." Hannah was silent for a long time, then squeezed my hand gently. "You were never stuck anywhere," she said finally. "You were just building your wings in silence." Her words pierced something deep inside me. For the first time in years, someone in my family truly saw me, not the facade, not the role, but the woman I had become through fire and persistence. Later that night, Leonardo found me by the bar, his tone quieter now. "Julian and Gabriella finalized their divorce last week," he said. "Their lawyers are arguing over debts, not assets." I wasn't surprised. He went on. "Julian sent you an email. 3 words. I was wrong." I nodded, already knowing what I'd do. I deleted it without opening it. There was nothing he could write that could matter now. As for Gabriella, Leonardo said she'd retreated to some mountain resort in Colorado, posting vague quotes about new beginnings and finding yourself. Their names had become cautionary tales in business schools, lectures on arrogance, underestimation, and the fatal mistake of judging people by appearances. But as I stood there, surrounded by women whose lives had been rewritten by their own determination, I realized Julian and Gabriella had become something even smaller, irrelevant. When the night finally wound down, I slipped away to my office 1 floor above the ballroom. The faint pulse of the celebration echoed through the ceiling, laughter, music, glasses clinking. I stood by the window, looking out at the city I had conquered in silence. Tomorrow would bring new battles, 3 corporate takeovers to defend, 2 interviews with women whose eyes carried the same exhaustion and fire I once knew, and a strategy meeting for international expansion. In the glass, my reflection met my gaze, tired, yes, but steady. Satisfied. The woman they once mocked for being stuck in a small office now owned the entire building. The woman they said would never rise had built something that would outlast their names, their laughter, and their judgment. Below, the city lights sparkled like 1,000 unopened promises, each one a company waiting to be saved, a dream waiting to be funded, a person ready to rise. The view from the 42nd floor wasn't just about height. It was about perspective. And from here, the future looked absolutely unforgettable. This story of powerful revenge and poetic justice gave you chills, didn't it? Tap that like button if it did. My favorite moment? When Rosalie walked into that boardroom and owned the very stage they thought was theirs. What was yours? Tell me in the comments below. And don't miss the next story of women who rise from silence to power. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload.